Today is February 12, 2021, and the Tucson Astrologers Guild is proud to present Alan Clay, speaking on the blessing of Ixion, Pluto's new lawless brother. I'm so glad that we could have Alan join us in this digital format we're now using. He can speak for us even if he's not in the area, and he's not. He's on the North Island of New Zealand, just a couple out, 2.5 hours north of Wellington. So he's way out there, but he's on the Zoom with us. Isn't that great? The whole world is in our area now. This age of Zoom. Yay. Alan was our speaker in June of 2019. He spoke about his Sedna and showed us and brought us copies of his masterful and amazing work on Sedna. I should have a copy here to show. I mean, it's an amazing book on Sedna. It's been acclaimed in many astrological circles. So, you know, I could go on, but I think we'd rather hear from our speaker tonight. So let's hear it for some applause and welcome Alan.
Thank you so much. Oh, that is so lovely. And I'll just share my screen so that I can show you something as I talk. And let's see if I can play from there. A bit of PR right from the start for my new Dwarf Planet University and an Ixion course which starts next week. And it does, it looks at Ixion in your chart. It's actually a sort of similar to the one you did, Gail, but it's 6 weeks, a little more in depth and in a different structure. So there's more sharing sort of thing of information. And I'll talk more about that at the end if anyone's interested. I'm happy to offer anyone here who's interested very cheap scholarship prices on that course. So let's look at Ixion. How shall we understand these new dwarf planets? One way is to look at orbital characteristics. So Ixion is a dwarf planet located in the Kuiper belt just beyond Neptune. And he's classified as a Plutino because, like Pluto, he has an orbit which is inclined to the ecliptic of all the other planets. His orbital period, 251 years, is 3 years longer than Pluto's. And his orbit is a slightly higher inclination of 19 degrees to Pluto's 17. That's the inclination to the ecliptic. So all the planets go around the ecliptic in a plane, most of them, and Pluto cuts through that ecliptic on a 17-degree angle, and Ixion cuts through on a 19-degree angle. And as a result of their inclination, they both spend part of each orbit in the underworld and part above. So part under the ecliptic and part above. And however, they're oriented differently because they're a bit comet-shaped, a bit eccentric in their orbit. And so the perihelion is the point in the orbit closest to the sun. And for Pluto, that's above the ecliptic, meaning he spends most of his time underneath in the underworld, whereas Ixion's perihelion is below the ecliptic, so he spends most of the time in the upper world. And here is a picture of that. We see Ixion's perihelion down here, and most of his time being spent up here above the ecliptic, which Neptune orbits in. And there's a synchronicity with these two orbits. They're essentially in the same orbit, but they never hit one another because both Pluto and Ixion orbit in a 2 to 3 resonance with the orbit of Neptune. So for every 3 Neptune orbits, Ixion completes 2. So this means that although their orbits cross, they never actually come close to one another. But in terms of understanding astrological meaning, it's important that they're in a resonance, that he's in a resonance with Neptune. And just as Pluto cuts inside Neptune at one point, the inclination of Ixion's orbit means that he also cuts inside the orbits of both Pluto and Neptune at one point in his cycle, strengthening his influence in that period. So we're coming up to the start of the next one in 2034 as he swings inside Pluto's orbit. We had this with Pluto 20 years ago or something. There was a period there where Pluto was inside Neptune. So from these orbital characteristics, we can see that Ixion has a Plutonian energy, one which cuts through existing systems even more than Pluto, but which works more out in the open and less in the underworld. And like Pluto, the resonance to Neptune lends a spiritual nature to Ixion's energy. And we may not sort of think of Pluto as being particularly spiritual, but I'm going to suggest that the outer planets, and I'm meaning from Uranus out all the way to Sedna, they represent aspects of consciousness, and that because they're representing aspects of consciousness, how they affect our lives depends on our existing consciousness. Pluto at the unconscious level is pretty forceful and maybe even violent, and you know, I would suggest at the spiritual level, Pluto is actually a wonderful energy of transformation. There is no problem with it. I mean, I'm a Scorpion with Pluto in the 8th, so, you know. Ixion also, I would suggest, although at the unconscious level, sort of, you know, unsettling events, roughshod experiences, you know, at the more spiritual level, we'll find a different Ixion, I suggest. I'm jumping into the myth early. Now, myths transmit knowledge across time and culture, but they have to be interpreted. And so that's the danger of jumping into it early. So I'm rushing through this. I'm just going to kind of throw it at you and then interpret a little bit. So another heavy myth, so bear with me. When Ixion got married, he promised his father-in-law a valuable present, but he never delivered on this promise. So his father-in-law stole some of his horses in retaliation. In response, Ixion invited him to a feast, and when he arrived, he pushed his father-in-law onto a bed of burning coals, killing him. So guilt over this drove Ixion mad, and the princes of the neighboring kingdoms refused him catharsis to cleanse his guilt because they were so offended by his violation of their strict code of guest-host relations. So catharsis was a thing, public ritual, and he was refused it. Because of his violation of guest-host relations, their code. And that was important because, you know, otherwise people couldn't travel around the country and stay with other people if they were going to be killed at night by pushed on a bed of burning coals. So he lived as an outlaw and was shunned. However, the king of the gods, Zeus, took pity on him and brought him to Olympus and introduced him to the other gods. Showing no appreciation, Ixion grew lustful for Zeus's wife, wasting the second chance at rehabilitation and further violating guest-host relations. Zeus got wind of it and substituted a cloud in the shape of his wife, with whom Ixion mated. And through this act, he fathered the centaurs, not Chiron. He was fathered a different way, but Chiron's brothers and sisters, who are half horse and half human. And for this, he was expelled and bound to a burning wheel and sent spinning across the heavens for all eternity. Yes, so a pretty heavy myth. And again, I suggest we have to interpret it differently at the unconscious level, or if we're on the spiritual path already, or if we're at a spiritually evolved level. Ixion acts differently. So, yes, that's what I'm just saying there, very much. And so at the unconscious level, the myth suggests the action of this dwarf planet will involve broken promises and retribution, leading to an outcast, outlaw status. And there is a danger that second chances will be wasted through the arousal of base passions. And once we're on the spiritual path, however, Ixion represents a passionate spiritual mission, which may involve a violation of existing customs and a resulting catharsis, followed by opportunities for a second chance. Important to take those opportunities. And at the spiritually evolved level, he offers us the opportunity to define our own rules and live life on our own terms, while respecting the implicit agreements in our relationships and transmuting our base emotions. Any thoughts or questions? Anyone want to jump in? And at any stage, it's good just to, something is not clear or you want to, here you go, you guys.
I haven't seen anything in the chat. Everybody's muted, so.
That's all good. I'm just encouraging to do interact, as we go. So here's Philip Sedgwick, of course you all know, he interprets Ixion, the positive traits as understanding the karmic wheel, giving and using a second chance, and discerning. And the negative as lustful, inconsiderate, inclined to repeat errors, and learning nothing from experience. And here's Mark Andrew Holmes's keywords, which I love. I have sort of taken his keywords which relate more to the higher levels of Ixion. Being without regrets, strength through joy, lust for life, charisma, inventiveness, ingenuity, creating trouble, creating change, breaking eggs in order to make omelets. It's the only way to do it. And taking the tiger by the tail. The only place to take a tiger by. So in the myth, Ixion has no sense of right or wrong, and he lacks boundaries. He's outside Saturn, but he has a joy in life and an inventiveness which carries him through until it doesn't if he hasn't learned anything the second or third time. So in our charts, it can give us the strength to take the tiger by the tail and create change, secure in the knowledge that we have to break some eggs in order to make an omelette. He represents a passionate, lawless energy, which, when positively placed, indicates an ability to bend the rules and get things done, and to learn from experience. And when negatively placed, he encourages us to try and get what we want without regard for others or for norms, and to waste any second chances we may receive. So I'm going to suggest that aspects with Ixion can give us the strength to pursue our spiritual passion, which is what we need to pursue a personal spiritual path in this world, a path which will likely start by accepting our passionate nature. So I'm linking Ixion here with the Neptunian resonance with Neptune. And at the highest level, Ixion is passionate and spiritual and able to maintain a personal spiritual path. The myth's all about a passionate personal mission. And the orbital resonance with Neptune, at the more enlightened level, this can become a spiritual mission, where personal passions can become spiritual paths. Any personal passion can be a spiritual path these days, I suggest. And when Neptune's spirituality is nebulous, Ixion takes that energy and focuses it in a personal spiritual mission, which is not afraid to experience both the dark and the light sides and go beyond the norms. And we need this sort of spiritual passion at this time, because religions are breaking down as a way of focusing that Neptunian energy, and we're each needing to find the strength to chart our own spiritual course. All right, another way that we can understand these new planets is to look at the Sabian symbol for the discovery degree. So it's like a birth symbol. When we first get to see the planet, where is it and what does that symbol suggest to us? So Ixion was discovered at 5 degrees Sagittarius, 36 minutes. So that's the Sabian symbol for 6 degrees Sagittarius, which is a game of cricket. And the keynote here is the development of skill in group situations, testing collective goals. Any society is built on the interplay between groups of people, each group united by at least a temporary aim. And the individual person within the group is assigned a particular role in the play, and definite rules have to be obeyed. The game teaches not only personal skill, but fairness and cooperation. Where the symbol is found, the value of making individual will or ego will subservient to collective cultural patterns is emphasized. Several symbols belonging to this section relate to games or group rituals because these are abstracted from everyday social behavior and used as educative means to develop group consciousness and an individual sense of responsibility to the group. So the key phrase here is the importance of developing group solidarity. Now, group solidarity would appear to be the opposite of the sort of independent streak that I've been painting Ixion as. But what I think Ixion is encouraging us to ask is, are the rules that we're playing by the right ones? He's outside of Saturn, he wants to do what he wants, and by doing that, he's asking, well, am I allowed to? What both the myth and the Sabian symbol for the discovery degree have in common is a focus on the spoken or unspoken rules or agreements in our interpersonal relationships. The myth focuses on what happens when we abuse those agreements, and the discovery degree talks of the successes when we can work together based on them. Together, I think they are saying that while Ixion does encourage us to strike out in new directions and follow our passion on an individual level, the goal here is to find a new way to play our part in the big social game that we're all involved in, and thereby develop the game. That's the spiritual mission of Ixion. So another way we can understand these new planets is obviously look at them in the signs and see what was happening when they were in particular signs. So Ixion spent a couple of months stationary retrograde at 0 degrees Capricorn in March and April of last year before moving back into Sagittarius, where he's been for the past 24 years. And he went into Capricorn again in the beginning of January this year. So those 2 months, March and April last year, saw the collapse of the share market and big changes in social order brought about by the lockdowns that were happening all over the planet. These events are more the playing out of the recent Saturn-Pluto Ceres conjunction, I suggest, but Ixion has certainly lent a lawless willfulness to our experience of the structural challenges we face at this time. So he's just gone into Capricorn at the beginning of this year, and he's going to be here for 20-something years, except for a few months from August to October this year. So to understand this Capricorn ingress better, let's look back at the Sagittarius cycle and see, which is just ending, and the previous Scorpio cycle. So he takes 3 years, just like Pluto, to ingress a sign, but we're going to average and say he ingressed into Scorpio in 65 and Sagittarius in 96. Ixion and Scorpio. So the period from 65 to 96 saw an increased interest in the occult and in magical practices. And because Ixion brings a passionate individual approach and Scorpion is all about relationship, this was a period of sexual and social liberation. And the early 70s saw the growth of the modern feminist and gay movements, Ixion and Scorpion. And because each transit highlights the opposite sign, in this case Taurus, we had greed is good in the 80s, epitomized by the movie Wall Street. And the lead character in Wall Street is a very Ixionic character, essentially a sociopath who's out for whatever he can get. And that was good, according to the 80s. All right, so Ixion and Sagittarius. So the period from 96 till today has been marked by a heightened sense of freedom and individual rights and a growing sense of the inevitability of these rights. So in Sagittarius, he's been overthrowing preconceptions and encouraging radical philosophies as well as conspiracy theories and fake news. Alongside this has gone a freedom of belief approach to spirituality. So Ixion and Sagittarius has seen the birth of pluralism, the acceptance that we can each believe what works for us. But this has also created the fervent fundamentalist backlash that we see at the end of this cycle. A lot of us have simply gone along with the crowd on pluralism without really accepting the validity of anything other than our own view. And because we immerse ourselves in bubbles of media and friends that simply support that view, it is only at moments of crisis that we are called on to step outside of that. So what will Ixion and Capricorn be? Crisis. We're being asked to step outside our bubble. The goal of this transit, I suggest, is to adjust our system so each of our individual approaches can flourish within the collective. Ixion does this by taking action and asking for forgiveness afterwards, rather than permission before. So there will be much taking advantage in the form of corruption and even the rise of criminal regimes. This is the point where I do mention that in America, you are going through, this last week, you have had your Ixion return to your America chart. And you all know what's been going on this past week in America. And we're talking about corruption and the rise of criminal regimes, or attempted. Volatility in the share market is certain from our experience when Ixion was stationary at 0 degrees Capricorn in March and April, which means last year, which means people losing wealth. So we're likely to see all the loopholes in the system being exploited, and the system itself likely being perverted by the criminal actions of leaders and of people of all walks of life in response. I wrote this 6 months ago. And at the same time, these pressures will motivate us to strike out in search of new ways of governing ourselves and new systems and institutions which can be put in place to foster individuality within the system. The end result of this is likely to be greater individual freedom within society for us to pursue our passions, I suggest. It's going to be a hard one, of course, always is. And the opposition to cancer suggests that in reaction to this, there could also be a return to family values, pushback against the evolving diversity and decentralization of social structures likely in this period. Any thoughts or questions, particularly about my controversial comments about the Ixion return? No? I'm going to provoke you.
I think it's promising. It looks promising.
Good. that's the attitude, exactly. So Ixion conjunct the galactic center. So the Ixion return will play out over these next few years. There's a few hits, goes forward and backward, obviously. So this is the first exact conjunction last week. So Ixion was conjunct the galactic center in September last year, stationary direct, and that was the last time he was there. He'd been doing it a few times over the last couple of years. And I think that suggests that this puts a whole new view on these last years, because the galactic center is a point of awakening, stimulating the creation of new thoughts and the release of limiting beliefs. So with Follow Our Bliss Ixion transiting, we've seen this process play out in real time as limiting beliefs have been put forward as solutions in some parts of the globe, particularly America, only to fail under the relentless onslaught of the times and radical new ideas like universal income and universal healthcare, I'm going to be provocative, starts to gain favor. Played out recently, that was at the end of last year in September, there is no racial bias in the US police argument that Trump and Barr were still running after all the videos and protests proving the opposite. Okay, I'm sorry I'm being so provocative. When we come to the second house case studies, I'll be a little more provocative. If you're a Republican, I do apologize for that. I'm green, so my politics is on display. Any thoughts or questions? Have I provoked anyone to
I'm sure they will come up with some by the end. I hope people are jotting down their questions as we're going through this, because there is quite a lot to
unpack.
process.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
I think I may be just bulldozering through, and so please do. That's what I say. So it's good to chat. To sort of the interaction helps the understanding. So what I'm going to do now is go on to some sort of early interpretations that I've developed for the houses, and then a couple of case studies for each house. And then I'd like those of us who, so if you have Ixion in the house, please then give me some feedback on those interpretations. We're all different, but if you see anything in that interpretation manifesting in your life like that, or if you see it manifesting differently, and please tell me that too. So I'm going to jump into Ixion in the first house. Do we have anyone with Ixion in the first house? You can unmute and just say that you've got it if you can, I guess, is possible, as well as putting it in the chat, or alternatively.
You've got, well, Gail is a prime example of Ixion right there on that first, on the ascendant. So
right,
anybody, you can ask me. Me about, there must be somebody else, anybody else with the Ixion in the first house. Either speak up or put it in the chat.
Yeah, exactly.
I have Ixion at 1858 Libra, ascendant 2257 Libra. Would you count that as a 12th house or a first house influence? Because it's like just above the ascendant.
And is that, how many degrees are we talking there? So is it 3 degrees? I was just...
No, it's more like within 5.
It's within
4 degrees.
4 degrees. I'd definitely call that a conjunction of Ixion and the ascendant, but I'd place Ixion in the 12th house. But why don't you have a quick, I mean, as we go through now, have a look at the first house and see if you can relate to that. And then as we go through the 12th house interpretation and see what you think. But I would tend to put it in the 12th, unless it was like within 2 degrees of the ascendant, of the cusp, the next house. So at all levels, I'm going to suggest with Ixion in the first house, we're likely to embody this independent energy in our essence, to feel that it is important to do what we want, when we want, and to honor our own compass. So at the unconscious level, this can become problematic because Ixion was a loner who was shunned by society for his lawless ways. And so themes of breaking or bending the law or of ostracization can manifest in our lives if we're not consciously working with the energy. As we get onto the spiritual path, however, this placement enables an independent spiritual investigation. Although many spiritual practices require submission and acceptance of a higher master, we must have the room to be ourselves and make the practice our own. And at the spiritual level, this placement can give a unique sense of self together with an awareness of the social norms within which that uniqueness is embedded. At this level, we can lead the way by example and can play a unique role in shaping the future. So Albert Einstein has Ixion in the first house, obviously famous for his theory of relativity, postulating that all observation is dependent on the observer. Wow, Ixion in the first house. It encouraged him to be uniquely himself. He was one of the foremost thinkers of our time. Many consider a genius. His Ixion was trine his sun in the 10th. So with his follow my bliss Ixion in the house of identity, his unique sense of self flowed with his will to play a social role. And his Ixion was also opposite his Mars in the 7th house, which challenged him in personal relationships, and in conjunct Jupiter in the 9th house, so he had a fated influence on our knowledge and our beliefs. It was also sextile Pluto in the 11th, so his independent streak assisted a powerful transformation in the collective consciousness. And Clara Barton. She was a trailblazing nurse who worked in hospitals during the American Civil War and went on to found the American Red Cross. She has her Ixion conjunct her ascendant and Chiron, so she had a unique sense of self and an ability for lawless healing advocacy. I suggest Ixion conjunct Chiron and the ascendant, lawless healing advocacy. And why was it lawless? Because she was doing this human rights advocacy work before women even had the right to vote. And Ixion is also square a close conjunction of Uranus, Neptune, and the Sun with her MC. So through her unique sense of self and her lawless advocacy, she challenged society to be more compassionate and sensitive to health practices. It's also semi-square her Venus on the 12th house cusp, which challenged her to set up an institution to promote these values, the American Red Cross. Amazing when you see sort of in the aspects how it's working. It's just, you know, we imagine the outer planets, it's just like Pluto, it's strong and powerful. So Gail.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So you're relating to that Ixion in the first house, I'm assuming. I mean, from what I know of you.
Oh yes, I. In my youth, yeah, or years past, I have, you know, it had many of these traits, you know, and I like to think that I have evolved and
yes, you have. Yeah, exactly.
Spiritual
totally.
level of Ixion now.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're very much on independent spiritual investigation.
Independent, I can relate to the independence. I know everybody who knows me knows that independent grew up on this hill out here in south of Tucson, and
yeah.
And I can relate to it a lot also.
Cool.
I had a bad experience in a rather authoritarian religion that I agreed with, but then when they started telling me what I had to believe, especially getting out of astrology, I said, no, bye.
Yeah, perfect. And I'm seeing that in the 12th house there, because the institution, the religion is an institution that you had to get out of to link it with the ascendant and be yourself. And yeah, so yeah, brilliant. You're actually kind of placing it in the first house by doing that. So, you know, you're kind of adjusting. So brilliant. Oh, good. And when we come to the 12th house, see what you think there too, whether you're
I had to tell you, I was rereading that thing about the spiritual master, and it was in my youth. Of course, I had opportunities, you know, to be with this Buddhist master or this other guru or anything, and I took what they offered, but I was not gonna. I'm not I'm not good at submission.
Exactly. No, it doesn't work. Actually, on the first house. I mean, no, it's just not going to work. You know, so, no, and good. You know, I mean, we're all on a different path. That's it. It's some people. It's good to be on a path that, you know, to have a master. I didn't want to do that. I was just trying to get my cursor there. Do we have any second house people? Can I ask? Just unmute, and it's probably the easiest way.
Yes, I am.
Lovely. All righty. So with Ixion in the second house, so this placement gives an inner strength to pursue what may well be a rocky financial road. It encourages unconventional finances, and many with Ixion in the second house may end up working for themselves. At the unconscious level, we're likely to play fast and loose with the resources at our disposal by not paying our bills or cutting financial corners, getting involved in confidence schemes, or deceiving through non-disclosure or through straight out theft. I mean, obviously we're not at the unconscious level, we're on the spiritual path. So once we're on the spiritual path with this placement, we may well be able to make a considerable amount of money, so long as that is the result of our individual spiritual passion. But we may also lose resources and maybe respect at some point, and we must also accept this and learn from it so we make the most of our second chance. And at the spiritually evolved level, Ixion the second can bring an inspired understanding of how to work in the physical world to enable our personal freedoms and thereby affect change from within. We may even set up social rules to assist this process or develop disruptive technology, which, when it becomes part of society, encourages the independent process. So here I go with a couple of political examples. Of course, Mr. Trump is an Ixion in the second at the unconscious level. He inherited his money from his father, allegedly without paying the appropriate taxes. He's notorious for bankrupting businesses and walking away with large amounts of money and tax benefits while not paying the bills. His Ixion is square Mercury, the planet of ideas and communication, in the 11th house of collective consciousness. And his Trump University was the subject of 3 lawsuits alleging it defrauded students through misleading marketing practices and aggressive sales tactics. He paid $25 million to settle those lawsuits. They were real. His Ixion is also sextile Pluto, the planet of power, in the 12th house of institutions, and in a stressful sesquiquadrat with his MC, showing the tension between his lawless resource tendencies, 2nd house, and his role in society, which has resulted in now his 2nd impeachment. And poetically, Nancy Pelosi, we see also has Ixion in the 2nd house. And we see how it can indicate both a lawless approach, as in Trump, and also holding account of such lawless behavior, depending on the chart aspects. She initiated both impeachments against him. Nancy has Ixion opposite her sun, which is in the 8th house of collective resources. So she understands those lawless tendencies, but is also aware of the drain on the collective resources through such corruption and self-dealing. Her Ixion is also conjunct Trump's Neptune, and she is one of the few people able to consistently see through his camouflage of distraction, lies, and denial, and call him on his behavior. And I wrote this a long time ago, but he has become so unsettled by this that for the most part, he stopped attacking her, even though she is actually responsible for each of his impeachments. So there we are. Sorry, there's my politics as well. I mean, everything's interpretation, and you can interpret that maybe Nancy's the unconscious one and Trump's spiritually evolved.
So I can say with my 2nd house Ixion that I do work for myself, and I have for a long time doing homeopathy.
Lovely.
And
Good on you.
teaching and astrology and all of those lawless things.
That's right. Outside of customary. What's customary? Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm suggesting is so important for us to do, all of us now in the world, is to, that's why Ixion's been discovered, for us to sort of take that. So that's lovely to hear. Thank you.
And it was on my IC is 5 degree 47 Sag. And the thought that came to me about that was, was really sick a lot of my younger years and was pronounced dead and all that kind of thing.
Wow.
A couple of times. And so that just, I don't know if that has something to do with any of that, but I would say probably so.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, particularly if that illness was in some way directing you to be more passionate, to do what you were passionate about, sort of thing, in your home. Or maybe you had to find your passion there in your home. I mean, it sounds like working with homeopathy. You did. So, so yeah. Yes. Great. Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. Yes, that's beautiful research. I found it so fascinating when I just looked at the Ixion transits to my chart. And it's just like the Pluto transits. I mean, it's right there, so I encourage you all to do that. That's the sorts of things I do in the class that I run. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll talk more about that later. Lovely. Anyone with Ixion in the 3rd house?
Yes, I do.
Beautiful.
I think I do too.
Beautiful. It's lovely to have a few people, and it's a strong placement. So with Ixion in the 3rd house, we will be a free thinker, and no one is going to tell us what to think or believe. We will likely challenge the established thought in some way. We may appear to know things ahead of time, and by the time everyone else catches up, we're onto something else. So we may be underestimated and overlooked. And at the unconscious level, this placement can bring undesirables into our lives as siblings or neighbors who push us to develop our free thinking approach. As we grow, owning the bad boy or bad girl inside of us will lessen the need for this energy to be projected and manifest as other people. We can think of Ixion as the bad girl or bad boy inside of us who wants to get out there and just do whatever he or she wants to do. And if we don't express it, those sorts of people are going to be in our lives. to help us get that energy out. This placement can also arouse some willful righteousness in our communications with others, which may alienate them in turn and turn them into enemies. We may wish we had a second chance at some of these communications, and sometimes this may be possible, but only if we've learnt from our mistakes the first time round. And at the spiritually evolved level, this placement brings an evolutionary power to chart a new course for yourself and for humanity with ideas and through communication, and the opportunity for all of society to develop through the pursuit of our independent ideas. And I've got two sort of really key examples here. Charles Darwin, whose theory of evolution changed our perspective on the world, had Ixion in the third house. So he was raised in a free-thinking family and studied medicine, but gave it up to become a fanatical naturalist. His book, The Origin of the Species, published in 1859, caused a storm of debate, and his theory of evolution through natural selection instigated revolution in biological science and in our consciousness. He has Ixion conjunct Mercury, square Neptune on his ascendant, and trine Uranus and the North Node in the 11th house. So his lawless ideas challenged him to express a new vision for who we are and where we've come from, and it was his destiny for this to spread through the collective consciousness. Now I've been doing a man and a woman for each of the houses, but I just couldn't go past Darwin and Copernicus, who first proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis each day and that planets revolve around the sun. I mean, earth-shattering, what a great idea. Good man. He's considered the founder of modern astronomy because of his book Concerning the Revolutions of Celestial Spheres, which he published in 1543. So Nicholas has Ixion closely in conjunct his Mercury on the 8th house cusp and closely biquintile his part of fortune in the 10th, showing the fated nature of his ideas and communications about the inner workings of the universe and the evolutionary opportunity, the biquintile, for social advancement through pursuing an independent path. So look, I'm not suggesting that you're, Darwin or Copernicus, but the extremes we can see sort of, wow, free thinking and really changing free thinking changed our view, but at the time so controversial, and everyone said, no, stupid, of course not. That's not the way it is, so I don't know. Are you relating to any of this, either of our third house people?
I am.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to tell us a little bit how you see it manifesting in your life, or it's just helpful for me?
This is Jane, and definitely the part about the siblings. I've got a sister that when she comes around is either engaged in something criminal or just
Yes.
brings drama to my door, leaves children on my door, that kind of thing. So I can
Yep.
definitely relate to that. And
Yep.
also being a free thinker, definitely, that's me. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome.
I would say the same. My brother, I used to relate to him as the rebel, but
Yeah.
really it was more, he was the obvious one and I wasn't
Yeah,
so
right.
obvious, but it was the same under the surface. And now it's, I definitely don't like to be told how to think at all.
No, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Good. No, I can appreciate that, and thank goodness, because we all need you third house Ixions to have your own thoughts so that you can help us outside of that. Yeah.
But also learning how to express that a little more poetically and be careful with my words and not stick my foot in my mouth. I think I've learned that over the last couple of years. Yeah. Because with communication, it's a question of, can people receive the communication? Are they ready for it? The guru says to the disciple, no, you're not ready. Come back next year, do a bit more work. And
and that's because, you know, you can see it's just going to be a lot of work to get that communication through. So it's all a matter of adjusting our communication. I've worked a lot as a clown, and it's all about how you meet people, whether you can communicate with them and so on. So, and yeah, so it's not just you, it's them too. Any fourth house Ixions, just before I jump in here? I think we perhaps don't. So with Ixion in the fourth house, our home will be a unique expression. Here we go. Beautiful, Elizabeth, lovely.
I couldn't get myself unmuted. I have a fourth house Ixion. Yes.
Lovely. All right, we'll come back to you afterwards and see if you can relate to any of this. But I'm suggesting that with Ixion in the fourth, our home will be a unique expression of who we are, and hospitality, or the absence of it, will be a central function of both our birth home and of the home we create as an adult. At the unconscious level, this placement can bring undesirables into our home in some way. And depending on the aspects involved, these people could be guests in our home or other family members. And we all start life unconscious. So childhood can be a time when these undesirable people and experiences come into our lives to push us to develop our independent streak. If we're still experiencing this as adults, it's important to remember that if we don't own the planetary energies ourselves in every moment, we experience them in projected form. So owning the bad boy or bad girl inside of us will lessen the need for this energy to be projected and manifest as undesirable people and events in our lives. And at the spiritually evolved level of this placement, we can ordain our home, and our personal story becomes archetypal. Our ability to follow our bliss through adversity in our personal lives becomes an inspirational public example that's likely to bring us the respect and support of society and keep us safe from any ongoing conflict or controversy. So here we go, a couple of case studies. So Malala Yousafzai first came to the world attention as a child campaigner for women's rights in Afghanistan. She was famously shot by the Taliban on her way to school for the attention she was bringing to these issues. Her family relocated to England to facilitate her recovery and protect her from further attack. And she has become a powerful human rights campaigner while still a teenager, enabling girls to have a better education. Not surprisingly, she has Ixion conjunct Pluto, with both conjunct the IC, suggesting at the unconscious level lawless power struggles affecting her emotional ground, but also at the more spiritual level, the beginnings of her evolutionary mission. But the fact that it's tied so closely into the angles, square the ascendant and opposite the MC, gives her personal fight for education a more archetypal quality. And the Dalai Lama, the foremost spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, he was born in a farming and horse trading family in a small village. He has Ixion conjunct Mars in the fourth house. So he was discovered at the age of 2 by the search team who was looking for the new incarnation after the previous Lama died. He correctly picked the previous Lama's possessions from a lineup. So his Ixion is also closely inconjunct Uranus in the 11th house, and he became a pawn in the power games of warlords and the Tibetan and Chinese governments, and was held for ransom several times over the next 2 years, between the ages of 2 and 4, before finally arriving in the capital. This was the start of the process that meant at the age of 23, he had to flee to India from the Chinese invasion of Tibet. However, by 2013, he had become one of the 2 most popular world leaders. So I'm hoping, was it Elizabeth, that you weren't shot as a child or held for ransom, or again, I'm sort of using, yeah, here you go.
No, but the beginning of my life was very challenging the first year. And my childhood was actually very unique and with a very good family. When I was in late high school years, I walked in the women's movement with Betty Friedan,
Wow.
And I mean, to be in the company of the Dalai Lama and Malala is thank you, thank you, thank you.
Exactly. Yes.
I can relate to this urge to be around the bad boys, undesirables, because I went through a short stage of that in my 20s, which I don't know if that was just an inner spirit that needed to get out because I had lived a very restricted life. And I also have Ixion conjunct Saturn in the fourth.
Right.
So, and
Wow.
Neptune. So it's in between Saturn and Neptune, and it's sparing Uranus on my first. So
very strong.
yeah, there was
Very
some
strong. Yes.
very strong changes there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I can resonate with everything that you said in this
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Lizzie.
description. And
Yes,
yeah.
I have Saturn conjunct Sun, and when Ixion came up to transit conjunct my Saturn, I got into clown work. It was when I got started learning clown, and by the time it got off the conjunction with my Sun, I was teaching clown. So I think clown is quite good for Ixion conjunct Saturn. I'm not sure.
I was the class clown in high school, so that fits.
There you go. There you go. It's a way of freeing up that Saturn constraints and those Saturn sort of, rules. Yeah.
To have that sense of humor.
Sense of humor. So important. Good. Yeah. I think it's very important on the spiritual path to nurture a sense of humor, actually. I sort of, that's from my Sedna work rather than Ixion, but good on you. Well done. I do have a clown case study in the 8th house Ixion coming up, so you'll be interested in that. Do I have any 5th house Ixions?
Hi, it's Tom here. Yes, I am a 5th house Ixion.
Beautiful. So with Ixion,
and Frank also has 5th house. I had myself muted.
Beautiful. Yep, totally good. It's great to have a couple because, we're all different. And so we express the energy differently. And so it's good for us to see how it manifests in different people's lives. So with Ixion in the 5th house, I'm suggesting we will have a unique way of loving. And we will likely have love affairs which fall outside the norm and allow us to explore ourselves. Or we could have children who play fast and loose with the rules and push us to develop a unique parenting approach. Or we could be creative in a willfully independent avant-garde way. At the unconscious level, if we are not embodying the bad boy or bad girl energy of the planet ourselves, we may experience love affairs with people who turn out to be not what they originally seemed, and in the extreme may even be sociopaths or draw us into illegal situations. Once we're on the spiritual path with this placement, however, we have both the creativity and the contemplative perspective required to learn from our experience and not to waste second chances that we may receive. And at the spiritually evolved level, our individual creative efforts can connect with the collective consciousness in a way that resonates so strongly that it leads to meaningful change. The rich story world that we create or the unique real world event or product that we manifest provides a frame or context for others to see and develop the uniqueness in their own lives. So here I've got Laurie Anderson as an example. So she's an American performance artist, musician, and filmmaker specializing in multimedia projects, focusing on the use of language, technology, and visual imagery. She has Ixion conjunct Neptune in the 5th house. So she brings endless imagination to her willful creative mission. Her Ixion is sextile Pluto in the 3rd house, so her mission pushes the boundaries of her communication. She studied violin and sculpture as a child, and she has invented various instruments to use in her performances. She was one of the first artists to incorporate the internet in both her live and her digital performances. And her Ixion is also in conjunct her Mars in the 12th house, so her willful creative mission acts in a fateful way on the collective unconscious, and as a result, she is one of the leading avant-garde performers of her generation. And Alan Turing, he was an English mathematician, cryptologist, and philosopher. He worked for the government code and cipher school, which was Britain's code breaking centre during the war. His fifth house Ixion is strongly tied into his chart, square his ascendant and sextile his Mercury in the second. So his willful creative mission enabled material advances in communication. He is credited with formalizing the concepts of algorithm and computation with his Turing machine, which broke the German code, the first computer essentially. His Ixion was square Jupiter in the seventh house, representing challenges in expansion and one-to-one interactions brought on by the war. And it's also in conjunct Uranus, which is conjunct his MC. So it was his fateful social role to develop algorithms. And as a result, he is considered to be the father of computer science and artificial intelligence. I think AI was Sedna, and his Ixion is also in an evolutionary biquintile with Sedna in the 12th house, the house of the collective unconscious. So pretty awesome fifth house examples there.
So I've got a question, or
Yep.
actually a comment. Laurie
Yeah.
Anderson,
Mhm.
I first became aware of her around about 1983
Mhm.
with her album, well, with her song "Happy Birthday,"
Mhm.
and I was struck. Now, just one line in there really struck me. So it may be an Ixion type of thing,
Mhm.
and it was, "You were born, and so you are free."
Lovely. Very Ixion. That's it. How beautiful. Yep. That's the beauty of artists. They can just, grab a concept, a phrase, or an image and embody. Yeah, lovely. I don't know, Frank, were you relating to any of this fifth house?
A lot of it, but in a more abstract sense. I've used the word avant-garde to describe myself, but in more of an Alan Turing type sense. I'm not really very artistic, and my outer life, my dress, my hairstyle is very conventional. But I certainly think about more technical things and about society and communications much more like Alan Turing did. Just as a footnote, my Ixion is fairly closely conjunct my Neptune in the 12th house. Neptune's 12 and a half, 1230 Libra, and Ixion is 13 in just a couple of minutes Libra. And they're both sextile my Venus, but it doesn't seem to make really much in the way of any other aspects. I was looking at my chart while you were talking, trying to figure out if it was like quintile or biquintile, some other planet or something like that.
Yes, we have to tend to have to look them up because they're not normally there in our charts, the quintiles and biquintiles, depending on what you're using. But yes, so did you what was the aspect with Venus, and what house was Venus in?
Venus is in the fourth, and it's a sextile aspect between Venus and both Neptune and Ixion, which are conjunct.
Yes, yes. Well, that's beautiful. Yes, I mean, obviously the fifth house is opposite the 11th house. And so, that collective consciousness, or how what I'm doing interfaces with the collective consciousness is an aspect of that. That's what Turing, that's what you're relating to in terms of thinking of the...
Yeah, I'm very much aware of all that. The social political things that have been happening in the last year and even in the last week I've been very interested in doing a huge amount of research, trying to understand how a huge number of people can believe these wildly bizarre theories, conspiracy theories, like QAnon. It's fascinating in the sense that the whole cultural zeitgeist is such that a large percentage of the population can kind of go crazy.
Well, yes. I mean, the reality is, we agree on reality, or we don't agree on reality. I mean, reality, there isn't a sort of a fixed thing called reality. It's a construct which comes from our agreements and how we're going to operate within it. And so, yes, at the moment you're going through extremes in America there, where people have different constructs of what's actually happening. And that's a lot, I think, to do with Trump has Sedna in the ninth. And at the unconscious level, Sedna in the ninth is believe me, believe me, believe me, believe me, believe me. And that's what he did. He just said that all the time, you know.
Yeah.
So and so they do. It's simple, you know. But yeah, I know it's and Sedna's going to go into. We're not talking about Sedna, but Sedna's going to go into Gemini in 2024. So. Well, that's all we're going to have to sort all that out. You know?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
that's absolutely. And with Ixion now in Capricorn, we're having to sort out how we can live together, you know, in society with all these different views of who we are and what we're doing. So, Tom, did you want to just weigh in here?
Sure. I'm a bit eclectic because I'm an Aquarius, but in terms of loving or whatever, at one point when I was in 8th grade, I decided to be a priest after studying witchcraft, and then got disinherited at 15 from my mother because of my metaphysical beliefs with a certain group. And then at 23 got disinherited for being in another metaphysical group. But I had two really great lifelong friendships and somewhat of a love affair, but not quite. One was with a woman who was at the Neuropsychiatric Institute, who ended up, as I was engaged to her, being admitted to the psych ward. And the other person was actress Ryder, who was on General Hospital as a recurring role, who was much older than I was. And because of that, we really never got involved romantically, but we had a 30-year friendship until she died.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. And in terms of, I got a degree in electrical engineering and went into the arts because I found it as the entry point to get into Hollywood. I worked for PBS for broadcasting, and then I built electronic music devices. So I became the technical person for university, UCLA, because I had ran their electronic music and computer-aided instruction labs. Yeah. I did have one other girlfriend, and she went to be with Mother Teresa. She's a brilliant artist. She went to be with Mother Teresa in India, and then the nuns told her, well, why don't you go see the Dalai Lama? He's a pretty cool guy. So she hitchhiked around. She did, loved it. And she hitchhiked around India, and then she got kidnapped and had to be a prostitute. This is way before I met her, and she had a 12th house son. She ended up in all these relationships and marriages that were where she was a captive to the people. Wow. And so, but yeah, we really hit it off great. And be that it may, she didn't end up with me. She ended up with a psychiatrist, but that's another story. So anyway, I know I'm kind of bouncing around a bit, but
lovely. Thank you. Yes, they're beautiful. No, lovely to you know, just to see. We're talking about 5th house Ixion, loving, you know, the way we love, and it's love is such an important thing at this time in the world. So the more we can practice it, and the more we can embrace everyone in our love.
didn't say anything about Alan Turing. He had unusual love life, or
Exactly. So I can go there too. Yes. So if I just, don't do that. No, that's it. He has Jupiter in the 7th. So his Ixion is in the, here we are, in the 5th square, his Jupiter in the 7th. And he was homosexual, and he had an experience where late in his life, one of his lovers stole something from him, or an ex-lover, and he called the police and he told them that it was his ex-lover that had stolen it. And the police sort of convicted him for being homosexual. They didn't find the robber, but homosexuality was illegal at that stage, and so they convicted him of homosexuality, and they sentenced him to hormone treatment, and he died from cyanide poisoning a year later. He had been experimenting with cyanide, and there's some debate whether it was an accident or whether he committed suicide as a result of all of that experience. The long historical story is, or the short historical story is, many years later when England did away with the law on criminalising homosexuality, they called it after him. It was the Turing law. So he made a huge change in the law by allowing homosexuality in a way, as well as what he did for computer science and AI and so on. So a hugely influential person, and to do with his relationships,
right.
Yeah. Ixion on the 6th, do we have any? Well, had so many people, we must be coming to some where we don't have people. It looks like this might be one of them. So at the unconscious level with Ixion on the 6th, we're likely to want to rebel against the pressure to conform in our everyday routine and follow our bliss instead. Even the word routine is an anathema to those with this placement. At best, Ixion on the 6th wants a uniquely individual routine, but at the unconscious level, this can be a reactive process of cutting corners and bending the rules where possible to achieve this. If confronted and offered a second chance, it will likely be wasted, which can lead eventually to an outcast status. Again, we might project the energy if we don't embody it, and then we're likely to find shady characters inhabiting our daily routine in some way. At the spiritually evolved level, however, Ixion the 6th can give us an individual service mission, a unique ability to see through the detail of each moment and connect with the big picture to turn our daily activities into spiritual rituals and promote a uniquely individual spiritual approach. So I'm going to introduce a couple of extra case studies here, as well as the two that we'll see on the next pages. And because, of course, Carl Jung had Ixion in the 6th house, and so did Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was chosen as the leader of the Theosophical Society as an adolescent and was groomed for years to be the new world teacher before renouncing the leadership and closing the order. He kept teaching, but he said he had no allegiance to any nationality, caste, religion, or philosophy, and spent the rest of his life traveling the world speaking to large and small groups as well as individuals. Very Ixion in the 6th. The order was created for him, to teach through, to be the master. He said, no thanks, I'll just keep doing it anyway. And here we have Edward Snowden, a CIA employee who leaked highly classified information on the surveillance that US government was secretly doing on American citizens' communication. His Ixion is conjunct his moon in the 6th house, perhaps the signal of the ultimate whistleblower. He has a personal service mission to expose the lawlessness of government, opposite the 12th house, government. His Ixion is also square his Venus in the 3rd house, showing that he will be motivated by questions of values and freedom of information, 3rd house. And his sesquiquadrat his Sun in the first, so his lawless service mission poses challenges to him personally, and as a result, he's currently living in exile in Russia. Fortunately, his Ixion is also in an evolutionary quintile to his part of fortune in the 9th, which tells us that he will undoubtedly end up on the right side of history as a result. And Linda Goodman, a best-selling American astrologer famous for her book, Linda Goodman's Sun Signs. Ixion in the 6th, it was her lawless service mission to introduce astrology to the masses, 12th house masses. Her Ixion is trine Jupiter in the 10th house, and she is the author of the first astrology book to make the New York Times bestseller list. Her next book, Love Signs, also made the list and came with a 2.3 million payment for paperback rights. Imagine that, an astrology book, 2.3 million in advance. You know? Her Ixion is in conjunct her Sun in the 12th house, a fateful relationship between her will in the house of the collective unconscious and her path of bliss in the house of service, which is probably a key to her success. As was the opposition to Uranus in the 12th and the semi-sextile to Neptune in the 5th, giving her the astrological insight and the spiritual vision for her mission to succeed. Ixion in the 7th. Do we have anyone? Just unmuting if you think you're talking to us and we're not hearing you, because we're not, if you're talking. And otherwise, I'm moving straight on. At the unconscious level, Ixion in the 7th house is likely to bring passionate one-to-one relationships, which can run outside the bounds of social norms and might lead us to take any steps necessary to maintain them, even potentially illegal actions. Or we might experience this in projected form and find ourselves in relationships with shady characters. When we are on the spiritual path, something we feel passionate about must be lived for even within the bounds of a relationship. So our relationships must allow this. This placement enables us to seek out unique one-to-one relationships that assist us to follow our bliss and to allow us to develop our spiritual practice independent of existing belief systems. And at the spiritually evolved level, Ixion in the 7th understands the unspoken agreements and relationships that enable them to work. This placement blesses each of our relationships with a missionary-like focus, together with a playful irreverence to the norms, which enables them to be the vehicle of our unique contribution. And at this level, we will transmute our base emotions, may even forswear couple relationships because of a marriage to God, as we'll see in the case study. One of the case studies. So B.F. Skinner, he was an American behavioral psychologist who considered free will to be an illusion. Thankfully, we've moved on from this idea. He was professor of psychology at Harvard University for 16 years. We'll see why he thought that in his aspects. So with Ixion in the 7th house, he was seeking to push the boundaries in our understanding of one-to-one relationships. Its opposite is Venus in the 1st house, and in conjunct is Chiron, also in the 1st. So he saw human action as dependent on the consequences of previous actions. And the good consequences, meaning that the probability of repeating an action increases. So behavioral psychologist, if someone behaves like, our behavior will generate what's going to happen. That's all we need to think about, and we can condition behavior, so there is no free will. His Ixion was closely semi-sextile his north node in the 8th house and in conjunct his south node in the 2nd house. So his seeking to push the boundaries in relationships came from 2nd house karma, which can be to do with control issues, and pushed him towards his dharma in the house of collective energies, developing a new psychology. And Florence Nightingale, who established the first secular nursing school in the world and is considered the founder of modern nursing. Her Ixion was conjunct Saturn, Chiron, and the North Node, all in the 7th house. So her unique path was aligned with her destiny, which mixed work with the body and with wounding and healing, Chiron, body, Saturn, in her one-to-one relationship, 7th house, and that's what nursing is. Her Ixion was trying her Ceres in the 11th house, so she brought about a change in collective consciousness towards the sick, understanding the importance of hygiene and of nurturing them back to health. And semi-square her Sun in the 9th house of belief, and square her Venus in the 10th house of career. And so some historians say that she felt such a religious calling to her career that she remained chaste her whole life. Ixion in the 8th house. Do we have any 8s? I get to have a drink every time while I ask, so that's always good for me, but I'm not hearing any 8s. I'm just going to go straight on. If you need to unmute to do that. At the unconscious level, Ixion in the 8th can bring a passionate desire to fulfill our base emotional needs, which may have little regard for the effect this has on others or their relationships. Or we might experience this in projected form. Donald Trump has it. No, he doesn't. He has Eris in the 8th. That's right. With this placement, we will not be content living under someone else's thumb, and will need to strike out for our independence sooner rather than later. At this level, we may hate clowns because they represent the social chaos that ensues when the unspoken agreements in our relationships are not honored. Clowns don't honor them, and that's what's funny. However, I love the clown manifestation of Ixion because I believe it is one of the highest of the possible manifestations of the planet. And in the 8th house of collective energies, it seems particularly powerful, as we'll see in the case studies. When we're on a spiritual path with this placement, we will likely have a passionate interest in the spirit world in some way, or in the occult or astrology. And within the astrological discipline, we will likely gravitate to the transpersonal planets and the new dwarf planets. And at the spiritually evolved level, Ixion in the 8th brings an ability to adopt a playful approach to weighty occult issues, enabling a cross-fertilization of approaches into a new independent approach, which leads to the development of a new best practice. And we see that in Dane Rudger, who was a French-born American astrologer who had Ixion in the 8th house. He was the founder of humanistic astrology, which brought together traditional astrology and Jungian psychology. And he went on to pioneer modern transpersonal astrology. Essentially, today, everything is humanistic astrology, everything, Western astrology. His Ixion is in a stressful sesquiquadrat to his Sun in the 3rd house of ideas and communication. And he wrote more than 40 books. I mean, 40. The one that established his reputation was The Astrology of Personality, in which he argued that astrology is not predictive, but rather suggestive, and that we have free will in how we react to the astrological influences in our lives. His Ixion is also in an evolutionary biquintile to his North Node, also in the 3rd house. So his mission to go beyond traditional laws in occult areas had an evolutionary and destined impact through his writing. And it is square Uranus in the 11th and trine his ascendant, so his work challenged the traditional view of astrology in the collective consciousness. And Lucille Ball, one of the greatest and most well-known female clowns in history. She became well-known through her sitcoms like I Love Lucy, of which she was both the star and the producer. Lucy had Ixion conjunct Mercury in the 8th house, trine the moon in the 1st house. So her lawless communication with our collective energies aligned with her feelings and sense of self. There's also sextile Jupiter conjunct her south node in the 10th house. And she received many awards in her career and was the first woman to head a motion picture studio. There were challenges. It was semi-square Neptune in the 7th house, which challenged her to tune in psychically in one-to-one relationships. I consider that one of the hallmarks of clown. And it was also opposite Ixion in the 2nd house, demanding she grow her resources through a cathartic growth process, of which clown, again, is a good example. A cathartic growth process. Ixion on the 9th, I'm just running through them. Do we have any ninth house Ixions?
Mine is in the 9th house.
Lovely, Catherine. Awesome. That gives me a bit of a rest while you get to say whether you relate to it or not. So,
But it may be in the 8th house too. It depends on what house system you use.
well, what house system do you use?
I use whole sign now.
And so would that place it in the 8th or the 9th?
Well, I don't know. I'll have to.
I
look.
see. You'd have to look it up. So just in terms of that 8th house interpretation that we've just gone through, are you relating to any of that? I mean, I'll just flick back to...
Yes, in that I'm so interested in so many different avenues, like gemstones, Reiki, astrology, mediumship, a lot of different kinds of things, and they kind of like all roll in together.
Brilliant. Yeah, exactly. You roll them all together into what you're doing, and that's your strength there with Ixion in the 8th. Well, let's look at the 9th, and we'll just see whether you think, that you'll probably relate to both of them, I imagine.
Probably. That's my...
Yeah, we'll see how we go. So at the unconscious level, Ixion in the 9th house can bring a passionate personal exploration of a topic that is close to our heart. But we may be too emotionally invested, and as a result, we may cut corners or proceed without authorization or act illegally in some way because the end justifies the means. Only, of course, it doesn't in most instances. So we may run into a confrontation with the authorities as a result. And there is a danger at this level that we may not learn from these experiences and may repeatedly cut corners or get led astray by our base emotions, leading to stronger and stronger consequences. However, this process will eventually lead some with this placement to have an epiphany and embark on a learning-based path, which may well be a spiritual path. At the spiritually evolved level, this placement allows unique, far-out thinking, coupled with an ability to communicate this big picture perspective to everyday people. Failures or setbacks are seen as learning experiences. There is no such thing as failure. So second chances are maximized, and through this process, we can become thought leaders. Like Helen Keller, who was a linguist, a motivational speaker, and a writer, she became deaf and blind at the age of 1.5 due to an illness. This is before she could speak or write, obviously. And yet she had Ixion conjunct Mercury in the 9th house, trine her ascendant, giving her a truly unique mission to express herself, growing from a child who knew no words, could not hear others, and could not even see their lips moving, to someone who could write and even speak publicly. She learned to speak by feeling her teacher's lips as her teacher spoke and imitating this with her own mouth. And her teacher then signed in her hand how that sounded. And she repeated the process until she learned to speak. She ended up touring the world, giving lecture to us, blind and deaf. She wrote 12 books. Her Ixion Mercury conjunction is of course square her Saturn in the 5th house of creativity and closely sextile her Pluto in the 7th house, right on her descendant. She wrote 12 books. However, her first piece of published fiction at age 11 faced accusations of plagiarism because of a similarity to a story she must have heard as a child before she could even write or speak. So how to play with a child who can't communicate with, some of the time they read her stories, even though she couldn't understand the words. And those stories went into her unconscious. And then when she started writing, it came out. She thought it was her story, and she was head up for plagiarism. I mean, amazing karma. And Gandhi, Indian lawyer who led a campaign of nonviolent resistance, which was successful in gaining India's independence from British rule. So with Ixion in the 9th, he followed a unique spiritual path, achieving change through a series of fasts that later became hunger strikes. His Ixion was trine his Venus-Mars conjunction in the first house. So his unique path flowed with the dance of values and action that was at the heart of who he was. He was also square his Neptune in the sixth house. So the path challenged him to find a vision that would serve as an inspiration to others to join the protest. And it was sextile Pluto in the seventh, so it catalyzed change in those around him. And as a result, people flocked to his cause, and this eventually achieved social change, political change. So I don't know, Catherine, what you're thinking there, whether the eighth is more appropriate or whether you're seeing.
Well, they're kind of combined, like we were thinking, in that I am a teacher. And it's kind of funny. As a kid, I was fascinated by Helen Keller.
Were you? Awesome.
I was, still am. I just
Yeah,
think,
she is. Oh, yes, me too. Yeah.
And Gandhi, too, is also a person that means a lot to me. And the peace that he feels, I'm a very peaceful kind of person. But I also have aspects to Ixion. It's conjunct my Neptune, sextiles my moon Pluto, and sextiles my Mercury.
Nice. And where is your moon Pluto? What house?
7th.
And your Mercury?
11th.
And 11th. So beautiful in terms of, bringing into play those one-to-one relationships and collective consciousness there. Do you, what do you, so what do you do in terms of one-to-one relationships? Do you work with people in some way?
I was a teacher. I tutored for a time.
Exactly.
My friends and I talk about these things all the time: occult, astrology, all of stuff. And I've just begun working at the astrology store.
Oh, lovely.
And I work in the office, though. But then once in a while, when I have nothing to do, I'll go into where the customers come in, and I meet very interesting
people, I imagine.
Well, I'm having a lot of fun. This just started in January. So
lovely. Yes, so I'm seeing it there in your Ixion in the ninth with those sextiles through to your Venus, Pluto, and Mercury. Yeah. So yes, definitely. So your Ixion is in the ninth, is that? Yes, that's what we're talking about.
Whole sign.
Yeah. Okay, so
someone was wanting you to look at the Helen Keller chart a little bit more. Don was wanting you to pull up Helen Keller again. Don, did you want to ask a question about it? Helen Keller, yeah. Don, are you there?
Do you want to unmute, Don, and ask something about this chart or about Helen?
Oh, okay. She's got it. Okay. She wanted to get maybe she wanted to get the data.
Okay. There it is. Cool. All righty. And so we're up to the 10th. Do we have any 10th house? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Come on. The unconscious level Ixion in the 10th house encourages us to get what we want in society without thought to the consequences. And if we're in the thrall of our base emotions, this can lead us into some tricky, even illegal situations. This is particularly true in our professional relationships, where we may not respect the implicit agreements that underpin them and may act irreverently or try and take advantage in some way. With this placement, we are likely to feel that we don't fit in the social box being offered by society, and we need to learn to make our own way in the world. As we embark on the spiritual path and begin to transmute our base emotions, we learn that anything is possible, but not always right now. And we start to learn through trial and error in our professional interactions, learning where the limits are in each situation so we can maximize these. And at the spiritually evolved level with this placement, we can become leaders in our chosen field, We will likely have a reverence for our work, and there will likely be a corresponding reverence for it from the public. We may even become seminal influencers and inspire others to follow in our footsteps and to chart their own course. So Greta Thunberg is a teenage Swedish climate change activist. She was 15 and had just started 9th grade when she decided not to attend school until the Swedish general election 2 weeks later to protest climate change. Her protest began after the heat waves and wildfires during Sweden's hottest summer in at least 262 years. So this is a rectified chart. It places Ixion on her MC. In this chart, her MC-IC axis is closely aligned with her nodal axis, with her south node conjunct her MC and her Ixion. So she brings a lot of karmic power and a lawless activism to her social role. She also has Ixion trine Ceres and sextile Neptune, both in a very large first house. So as part of the very core of her being, she understands the bigger vision and the need to nurture the planet and can exemplify this. Soon, inspired by her protest, other students started engaging in similar protests. And a global strike 6 months later gathered more than 1 million strikers. So now we're going to look a little at Greta's transits for these dates, just to see how the transits, how we can look at transits to really bring the meaning out of Ixion in our personal chart. So on the day she started her strike, she had transiting Mercury trine her natal Ixion, transiting Uranus closely biquintile, and the transiting North Node also in a trine, showing the destined nature of her activism and the opportunity for her message to spread through a network. She also had transiting Ixion opposite her Saturn, square her Uranus, and semi-square her Neptune, challenging her to find a meaningful path of action and giving her the motivation to achieve it. So we're looking at transits to her natal Ixion and transit of Ixion to her other natal planets. Soon, inspired by her protest, as we said, other students started engaging in similar protests, and a global strike on the 15th of March 2019 gathered more than 1 million strikers. So on this date, she had transiting Pluto closely semi-square her natal Ixion as she faced up to power, and transiting Ixion semi-sextile her Mercury and sextile her Uranus as she fostered the networked message of the need for change. And she spoke to the UN Climate Action Summit on the 23rd September 2019, when her transiting North Node was closely biquintile her Ixion, showing again the destined nature of the opportunity, and when transiting Ixion was again closely sextile her Uranus, as her activism fostered her network. All right, and Prince Harry, also Ixion conjunct the MC, and exemplifying the willful, lawless social mission of Ixion. As a child, he was reportedly referred to by his mother as the naughty one of the family. His teenage years, the press labelled him the wild child when he was seen smoking cannabis, drinking underage, and fighting with paparazzi outside nightclubs. More recently, of course, he spectacularly resigned from his royal duties to prioritise his wife and family. I mean, who resigns from being king or prince? Someone with Ixion conjunct the MC, I would suggest. He has Ixion quintile Mercury in the 8th house, so his willful social passion finds opportunity in communication about collective issues and is a leading campaigner for various causes. And his Ixion is also semi-sextile both Venus on the 9th house cusp and Mars in the 11th house. So his social mission aligns with his values and knowledge and with the actions he takes to affect the collective consciousness. So we're going to look at his transits too. So he married Meghan in May 2019, and just hours before his wedding, his grandmother, the Queen, made him the Duke of Sussex. Then in January 2020, the couple announced their intention to step back as royal senior members of the royal family and split their time between the UK and North America. When the split was announced on the 8th of January, he had transiting Sun closely sextile his natal Ixion, transiting Neptune closely trine, and transiting Chiron closely sesquiquadrat, showing the move to be the fulfillment of a dream, Neptune, but one that would cause some challenges and possible wounds in his growth, sesquiquadrat Chiron. And he also had transiting Ixion closely quintile his Venus in the 9th house cusp and closely conjunct his Neptune in the 12th house, showing the opportunity for relationships and travel, the announcement enabled, and the release it provided from the web of influence of the institution of the royal family, Neptune in the 12th. The split came effective on the 31st of March 2020, and on this date he had both the transiting Sun and Moon closely biquintile, it was 144 degrees, with his natal Ixion. They weren't conjunct, they were from opposite sides of the chart, closely biquintile. And transiting North nodes sesquiquadrat, showing the importance and the opportunity provided by the move, but pointing to some fateful challenges as he pursues his destiny. Ixion was also transiting sextile his Pluto in the 9th house, in conjunct his North node in the 4th, and quintile his Venus on the 9th cusp, showing the freedom from being under the thumb of power, the mixed benefits to his home life from the split, but again, the opportunity for a flowering of his values and his relationship. So I do encourage you, it's really valuable to sort of look at transits to your natal Ixion, particularly obviously the sort of the outer planet transits, and transits of Ixion to the inner planets.
Alan, have you had any chance to look at Prince Harry's, I mean, what was it, his granduncle or great-granduncle, or the king that stepped down because for the love of his life?
No, yes, I haven't. Exactly. That would be a good case study to look at too. No, I haven't. So yes, Gail, go right ahead and
Oh, thanks.
send me your research and I'll post it, somewhere on, or you can post it on a forum on the site. Or, no, I do encourage. Yes, I'm just trying to stimulate everyone. Research it, and the more of us that are doing the research of this, the more we really come to understand this. Because I'm just scratching the surface, I'm sure. The 11th, do we have anyone with Ixion in the 11th? In the group?
I do.
Lovely.
I do.
Great, a couple of us. So with this placement, we are consciously or unconsciously tuning into the human weather pattern around us and sensing what is allowable in this particular gathering of people. So at the unconscious level, Ixion in the 11th house can play fast and loose with the people we know through our profession. And we know that Ixion is a rapist and a murderer in the myth. So at the unconscious level, the planet's energy can manifest like this. And Harvey Weinstein, the notorious rapist of movie stars, the people he knew through his profession, had this placement. At this level, we're likely to believe that because we've got away with whatever shady or illegal activity we have engaged until now, we will always get away with it and don't need to change. So we learn nothing from experience, just like Harvey, and he's now in prison as a result. Once we're on the spiritual path, however, this placement brings the same passion and willful independence to an exploration of consciousness, likely gaining both support and controversy from the community in the process. Here we learn from experience, which can include periods of feeling like an outcast because of our independent approach. At the spiritually evolved level with this placement, we can make a unique and valuable contribution to the collective consciousness, challenging established norms and entrenched ideas and systems. At this level, we are likely to be able to bring a bold new vision of who we are and what unites us, and so become leaders in consciousness. Just like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is the Democratic Congresswoman for the Bronx and Queens areas of New York, elected at 29. With Ixion in the 11th house, she has a lawless collective consciousness mission. And because her Ixion is semi-sextile, semi-square, her MC, It challenges her to find a place in society to facilitate this mission. She is the youngest woman ever to serve in the US Congress. Her Ixion is also semi-square her Saturn in the first house, so her mission will involve personally challenging established structures and practices. She was elected following an upset primary campaign where she beat a long-term incumbent. Semi-square her Saturn. It is also square her North Node in the second house, so it is at the apex of a T-square with her nodal axis, meaning her mission to stir up consciousness is the result of her karmic destiny, which is to do with the allocation of resources. And she is very progressive, obviously, in her views, advocates for a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, a jobs guarantee, free public college, and the abolition of US immigration and enforcement. And Joseph Campbell, professor of literature in America who specialized in comparative mythology and religion. He had Ixion on the cusp of his 11th house. And he was the one that coined the phrase, follow your bliss, to sum up his philosophy, which is how it has entered our collective consciousness. And I've kind of added it to Ixion to say, Ixion is encouraging us to follow our bliss. So his Ixion is also trine his Uranus in the third house and semi-sextile his North Node in the 12th. And these flows encourage the highest manifestation of the planet's energy in his life, as exemplified by his catchphrase, follow your bliss. His most well-known book is Hero with a Thousand Faces, in which he reveals the journey of the archetypal hero underlying all world mythologies. 11th house collective consciousness. Who's the Ixion? Who's the Ixion? So, yeah. So, are we, any of the couple of people who said Ixion in the 11th, can you relate to any of this interpretation, or can you see it manifesting in some other way in your life? I mean, that's also very helpful.
Alan?
Yeah?
I can actually share a lot. Yeah, you're amazing. This is great work, because there is just various bizarre things about my life that all fit what you're talking about here. But before I do that, I also wanted to knock the halo off of Nancy Pelosi's head.
Good.
Because, for instance, you know, she rushed through the whole Green New Deal, but she made sure she made a lot of money on Tesla stocks in the process, and she's also known in her district as everything that happens politically, she gets a cut. She looked out for her husband and the bailout, and so just wanted to see that. But
okay, I hear you. Good on you.
Yeah. But in terms of just running down some things here that had happened. First off, I went to a Catholic high school, and I didn't have long hair, but the guys were getting thrown out of the high school for having long hair. So what we did is a group of us got together, and we did an underground satirical newspaper, and I almost got thrown out of school. I think they saved me because I was in the top 10 in the class, and they were like, they didn't throw me out. But it changed the policy after that. You could have your hair any way you wanted it. Then moving on, I was quite the clown for my friends, and always in a group context. Also, I was ready to go to Canada. Didn't have to, got a high draft number, but I was very much involved in the anti-war movement. Some people in astrology knew that I created this character, Doc Chiron, who was a snake oil salesman. So it was a clown act, basically, because Chiron was totally the outsider at that point.
Oh, how beautiful! Wow.
And more recently, I was putting out a newsletter called Astrology's Minority Report, because I basically tend to see things from the minority point of view in astrology. So bing, 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 bing. Thank you.
Beautiful. So good. Thank you so much for that feedback. And I do encourage you in all of that work you're doing. It sounds great. So lovely. Do we have another 11th house person here?
Yes, I'm Esther.
Okay,
I think, yes, I've certainly been able to tune into this human weather pattern. I've worked a lot of different places. I've moved a lot. And coming in new as the outsider, it's really helped me to have some sense of the environment I was moving into. There's no doubt that as a Jungian student since the 80s, I've really looked at Joseph Campbell and collective consciousness and worked on the outer fringes of these consciousness studies with things like neurobiofeedback and hypnotherapy and Reiki and
lovely.
so forth. But my relocation chart puts this into the 12th house too. So I'm really interested in what you're going to say about the 12th house.
Brilliant. All right, good. It's a beautiful segue there. Perfect. So I'll just come through to the 12th. And do we have any other 12th house just to ask before we jump in? And unmuting if you're no. All right. So at the unconscious level, Ixion in the 12th house might leave us living our lives a little like a character from a novel by Franz Kafka, who had this placement, living largely independent lives, which will, however, are alienated from a society which is omnipresent and seems to be always working against us. And we might set up this alienation by not respecting the implicit agreements in our relationships and by not learning from experience and by being too passionately invested in our own point of view and too blinkered unconsciously to see what is really happening around us. But once we get on the spiritual path and start clearing our unconscious spiritual baggage, however, this placement gives us a rich field of activity for our spiritual growth, which allows a trial and error approach where failures become simply seen as learning experiences. At the spiritually evolved level, this placement can bring an almost direct connection with the divine, so we become a channel, and the divine can manifest through our uniquely independent approach to the material world. So here I'm looking at Julian Assange, I suggest at the unconscious level. He's an Australian hacker and activist who founded WikiLeaks, which published material from Chelsea Manning, and later from the DNC, which was obtained by Russia as part of their interference in the 2016 election. His Ixion in the 12th house is conjunct his moon, which would have to be a classic signature of trying to manipulate partners or governments by being a little too centered in what I want and our personal quixotic mission to unseat the institutional windmills that we might find ourselves institutionalized in our turn. Assange was charged with rape by Sweden, and he took refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, remaining there for almost 7 years. Last year, his asylum was withdrawn, and he spent a year in prison in the UK while US authorities have asked for his extradition. That's been turned down, but I believe he's still in prison. I'm not quite sure what the situation is at the moment. But Ada Lovelace at a higher level, she was a mathematician and writer. She assisted in the design of the first mechanical general purpose computer, the analytical engine, almost 200 years ago. So this analytical engine wasn't actually created, but it was designed, and she assisted in that design. So the inventor of the analytical engine was so impressed by her intellect and analytical skills, he called her the enchantress of number. She is considered to be the first computer programmer because she developed the first algorithms to explain how the machine would do its various calculations. She had Ixion exactly conjunct Sedna and Pluto in the 12th house, with this stellium square her sun, conjunct Neptune and the south node in the 9th house. And I relate Sedna to AI, so Ixion conjunct Sedna and Pluto in the 12th, and she's the first programmer. She believed that intuition and imagination were critical to effectively applying mathematical and scientific concepts. You had to have both intuition and imagination. She valued metaphysics as much as mathematics, viewing both as tools for exploring the unseen worlds around us. So we didn't have anyone in the 12th, did we?
Well,
We had Derek. Derek.
Oh,
Mine's
Derek.
12th too.
yeah,
Yes,
mine's
all right.
technically there, but close to the ascendant.
That's right. That's right, exactly. So what are you thinking, Derek? Are you relating to this 12th interpretation, or was the first more appropriate?
I think this has something to say to me.
Mhm.
The spiritual trial and error
Mhm.
you mentioned. This seems more like a path rather than an actuality with me. Does that make sense to you?
It does, yes. So, you know, so it's in the 12th house, but because it's conjunct the ascendant, you're sort of feeling that individual approach, but you're still actually in the big spiritual world, which is the 12th house.
Right.
And yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And who else was it? Who was?
I said with my relocation.
Oh yes, that's it. And so are you relating, so this is the relocation where you are now, is it, that you're talking about?
Yes, in Arizona.
And so you're seeing sort of more of this 12th house in Arizona and more of the 11th house where you were previously, or?
Yes, I certainly am. The birth chart was for Michigan, and this relocation is Arizona, and Neptune is within 2 degrees or of Ixion in the chart.
Yes. So again, I mean, a number of us have had this Ixion conjunct Neptune. It's all to do with obviously the years you're born. You know, I'm born in 1954, and mine aren't conjunct. Mine are still, they haven't come up to the conjunction, or they're just moving. No, haven't come up to it. Yes, so that conjunction is, you know, that's the generation that's really been sort of leading the way in terms of individual spiritual approach. Yeah, it's interesting to see that it manifests differently with the relocation, and I would expect that. So great, but I haven't looked at it till now. So beautiful. So did anyone want to talk about anything else at the?
We had Margot. Margot was also a 12th house Ixion. She tried.
Yeah, I'm a 12th house or 11th house, depending on the house system, but
Okay.
equal house is 12th house.
So how are you seeing it? Are you seeing it more as in this? Are you seeing it in either of the interpretations?
Yeah, both of them I can relate to.
Okay.
And like the other woman, I don't remember her name, but I've moved around an awful lot. And so I kind of try to grok the you know, what I'm trying to fit into.
Yeah.
I move.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. Yes.
And
well, go. Yep.
My Ixion is trine my Mercury in Aquarius at 14 degrees, and my Ixion is 11. Would you consider that?
Yes.
And then trine Mars in Gemini in the 8th house at 14.
Nice.
So
nice. Good aspects to enable your Ixion. Great. Well, what I'm just going to round out.
There was somebody who wanted to see the charts for the 11th house just for a brief minute.
Okay. The charts for the 11th house. So there's Joseph Campbell. So he has Ixion on the cusp of the 11th. You know, when it's on the cusp, it's really sort of catching it as a no, the other way. I had to go there, sorry, to get the other one. And so there's the other one. That was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and her Ixion is there in the 11th house, squaring her nodal axis. All right.
Thank you, Don says. Yes,
Beautiful.
thank you.
Lovely. So I'm just going to round us out a little bit. So I'm going to suggest that we need a strong internal compass to guide us beyond the traditional ideas that are crumbling around us in these years. We see that society, the world, humanity is evolving so fast that our current systems aren't really working for us at the moment, and we're having to sort of search new what works for us. So our world and our place are changing so fast that the old rules don't work effectively anymore, and we need to each need to find the passion to chart our own course into the future. This is what Ixion can help us do. So we've seen through the case studies how in each of the houses he can foster an independence of spirit and a passionate mission. And at the spiritual level, how this can serve as an evolutionary impulse to the wider society, because it charts a new approach which others can follow. And this, I suggest, is the blessing of Ixion. And I'm encouraging us to look at the kind of at Ixion from the higher level. Ixion will always be present in our lives at that unconscious level too. So we need to sort of, we need to work with the energy, and we need to work with how we're looking at it. And so I'll just end again with a little bit of PR for my Ixion course and some other courses for the goddess dwarf planets that I'm focusing on this year with the university. And this Ixion course, it's a 6-week course, and over that 6 weeks we get 4 Zoom webinars, 4 Zoom Q&A sessions of a couple of hours each, and 3 webinars which are similar to what this talk in a sense. And we also have assignments, which you can choose to do or not if you don't want to, but it's also a learning practice. Basically, like I just said, did we relate to those interpretations? And we sort of gave some feedback. Essentially, we're doing that in written form on a blog, attaching our chart, and then other students are sort of commenting and giving feedback and so on. So that's the nature of it, and we do investigate it in our chart through aspects, house position, and transits. And so if you're interested in checking it out, dwarfplanet.university is the website, www.dwarfplanet.university. And if you wanted to write to me at info@dwarfplanet.university, I would be happy to give you a scholarship on the Ixion course, anyone on this class. And the scholarships, the courses are about 190 New Zealand dollars. That's about 120, I think, US, something like that. But scholarship price brings it down to $60 New Zealand, about $43 US for the whole 6 weeks. And that's a sort of an introductory price because you're starting off with your work with me. So there you go. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And I guess if there's any questions or thoughts or so on, we've taken them as we're going, but there might be something now. Do we have time for that, Gail?
Well, yes, we getting a number of people saying how great this talk was. It's wonderful information. They're enjoying it very much.
Lovely.
I had a few thoughts, but they've flown away for the second.
It's all good. I know. That's how it happens.
Anybody jump in if you want to say anything to Alan, ask a last question or anything. Elizabeth says, amazing how pertinent this is to our individual personalities. Tom Withy, great. I'm an Ixion believer now.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Somebody asked to see Albert Einstein's chart again.
Okay. I'll just find it first, and then I'll share my screen because that'll be the quickest way to do it. He was right in the first house, so I'm just going through now to find that. Here we go. Here's Einstein. So I'm going to share the screen. Here we go. And I'll play from current slide. There we go. So there's his chart. And he's got Ixion in the first house here, opposite his Mars, trining his Sun in the 10th. So did you want to, whoever asked that, do you want to ask a question? Is there something particular you're interested in there, or is that good?
Thank you. I asked the question just because it had been the start and it has sort of zoomed by me fast. So
yes, exactly. All right, there we go. I'll stop sharing again. There we go. So yes, lovely. So is there any last thoughts or questions, or I'm going to say, yes, Anita, are you putting up your hand there? I seem to see. Or is that, or that's a wave? Is that a wave?
Yeah, yeah, you can unmute yourself, Anita, if you wanted to say anything. I guess not.
Oh, is that better?
Yes, now you're on.
I came late. I apologize. So
right.
I don't know where my, so I know I need to know what house it's in.
Yes. So you need to go to the Swiss ephemeris for Ixion. This is the easiest way to do it. So you can just search, if you want to, in Google for Swiss ephemeris for Ixion. It's and then you'll be able to look through.
It's in the chat. I mean,
it's in the chat.
What's her name put it in the chat very early on, and I sent it to you, Anita. It was right at the top of the there it is on the chat. But I did. It was right included with the information about the Zoom. It was just so up there. Here's the links to the Zooms, and oh, here's the link and the link to the ephemeris. And people, I think,
you know what happened? I was so upset that I was so late because I had forgotten all about it, that I didn't read the entire email, that I just, went straight to Zoom.
Okay, well, we'll forgive you.
May I say,
Anita, though,
Anita,
yes.
I know where yours is because our charts are almost exactly the same. So yours in the 8th, yours is in the 8th house when you use Placidus.
Perfect.
Okay. So many of us in our generation had that Ixion conjunct Neptune. So if you know where Neptune is in, I mean, I'm thinking of all of us in the 70s or in their 70s, or maybe their 60s, 70s.
Exactly.
I've got a stellium in the 8th house, so I'm not surprised it's there.
Right, exactly. Brilliant. Yes, and there is a recording, so if you missed the 8th house interpretation, you can pick it up on the recording. So beautiful.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been lovely talking with you guys. Really been lovely, and I encourage you in your investigations of Ixion. Do embrace Ixion and follow him in your chart, because like Pluto, it's best followed, rather than ignored.
Elizabeth said, thank you for your New Zealand energy. And I was thinking the very same thing. I love that, your accent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's beautiful that we can connect across the world like this. It's really a new age that we're in. So
speaking of which, I had a question. There were some animals that were noisy, that became noisy shortly after you began. And I'm curious, were they toads or birds, or what were they?
Yes, I'm not quite certain. I've got my back door open here. I was afraid there might be rats, so I'm going to have a look after this. I'm not quite sure. I know there are some that live out there, and I try and avoid them coming in. So, yeah.
Some what? You were afraid of? There were what?
Rats.
Rats.
Yeah, rodents. Yeah.
rats. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we do have,
Alan, it's been
oh,
wonderful seeing you again, and we want to
oh, thank you guys. It's been lovely being here.
thank you so much.
Beautiful. All right. And no doubt see you again soon. And do drop me a line if you want a cheap Ixion course or any of the other courses there. You're very welcome.
Wonderful.
All righty. Lovely. See you again.